We've been looking at the subject of providence, and last week we began to study the subject of the Apostle Paul and his journey to Rome. We have been setting the background in how all of this came about. And last week we ended up with him standing on the barracks of the commander after he's arrested because the mob has been stirred up against him, and he is going to give a defense of what has happened. And Paul speaks in the Hebrew language. And in chapter 22, in verses 1 through 16, he begins to rehearse his conversion. He tells them what happened to him on the road to Damascus in chapter number 9. And he just recounts for them. And we're not going to read the whole account, but I want to read verse 9 through 11. It says, "And those that were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So I said, What shall I do, Lord? And he said to me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all things which are appointed for you to do. And since I could not see for the glory of the light, being led by the hand of those that were with me, I came into Damascus." And he goes on to talk about that he was talked to by Ananias. And then in verse 16 it says, "And why are you tarrying and waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord." And so he just recounts for them. After he talked to Ananias, he became obedient to the gospel and became a Christian. Now, he told them of the temple experience. That's why he was arrested, verse 17 and 18. "Now it happened when I was returned to Jerusalem, I was praying in the temple, and I was in a trance, and saw him saying to me, Make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me. So I said, Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprison and beat those who believed in me." And so he was not in the temple with Timotheus, a Gentile. He was in there praying, and he was in a trance, and he was warned that he needed to get out of there because the Jews were going to resist him. And he remembered his former life and how that he was even giving consent to the stoning of Stephen in Acts chapter 7. And then God's mission for Paul. He understood what his mission was. And everything went well until verse 21. "And then he said, Depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles." When he told the Jews that his mission was to go to speak the gospel to the Gentiles, they had enough. And at that saying, they listened to him until that word. And they raised their voice and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live. And they cried out and tore off their clothes and threw dust in the air. And the commander had him returned to the barracks. You see, they were ready to kill him because he said the word Gentiles. Why? Because they didn't accept the Gentiles. They thought they were God's chosen people, and the Gentiles were dogs, according to their thinking. Now he's taken back to the barracks in Acts 22, verse 24 and 28, and the commander is going to scourge him to try to find out exactly what he has done and what his crime is. But when they bind him and they're getting ready to scourge him, he asks the person that's going to do the scourging, "Is it lawful for you to scourge an uncondemned Roman?" And when that is found out that he's a Roman citizen, that's what he is he's a free Roman citizen, that's what he was born. And so by his Roman citizenship, that afforded him a trial. He couldn't be charged unless he had an opportunity to face his people who were charging him, and also he could not be beaten. He could not be scourged because he was a Roman. And when the commander and the one who's going to carry out the scourging find out he's a Roman, they back off. They don't want anything to do with it, because then they'd be in trouble with the authorities of Rome. And then the commander releases it from his bonds. Now, he sought counsel to come and testify about Paul's conduct. Now, in Acts chapter 23, Paul speaks before the council with a pure conscience. He tells them that he's lived in good conscience before all men. He's done everything that he's done in his life in a good conscience, thinking he was doing the will of God. And he's rebuked the high priest. And that gets him slapped because he rebukes the high priest. But he goes on to reiterate that he didn't know that he was a high priest. And he perceived that the council was divided. He perceived that there were Sadducees and Pharisees in the council. And the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, but the Pharisees do. And so he told them that he was there for the hope of the resurrection. Well, that caused a tumult between the council, because half of them were Pharisees and half were Sadducees. And so that turned into chaos. And Paul is taken out by force because the council is fighting among themselves, and they're worried about Paul's safety, and they take him out for his own protection in verse number 10. Now, Paul would bear witness in Rome. Now, this is important, and this gets us back to our subject, Paul's journey to Rome. In Acts 23, verse 11, but the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified by me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome." And so God tells him that he's going to Rome. He's in Jerusalem, he's under arrest. They've tried to kill him. They were getting ready to beat him. And twice the crowds tried to tear him apart. But the angel of the Lord says, "You're going to witness for me in Rome." And so he's told point blank by God through this vision that he's going to go to Rome. Now 40 men banded together with an oath that they would neither eat nor drink until they killed Paul. Well, the problem with that, Paul's sister's son hears of the plot and comes and tells Paul in Acts 23, verse 16 and 17. Now I want you to begin to see how God's providence begins to work here. These men are plotting, and they want the commander to send him back down to Jerusalem, to the council, so they can further question him. Well, all they want to do is they have these 40 men and wait in an ambush to kill him. And so again, God's providence is that this comes to light. Paul's sister's son hears them talking about it, goes and tells Paul, and Paul sends him to the commander in verse 17 through 22, and tells the commander what's up. Tells him, don't send him down there, because they're waiting for him to kill him. And so what does he do? Well, the commander sends him to Felix. He determines in chapter 23, beginning in verse 23 through 25, he's going to send him to Caesarea, and he's going to get him out of Jerusalem, and he's going to send him to the authority, Felix, in Caesarea, and writes a letter and sends him in the middle of the night with 2 garrisons of soldiers and sends him to Caesarea. Now, he's tried before Felix. Ananias and Tertullus before Felix. Tertullus is the great orator that the Jews hired to go and make their defense on why Paul should be executed. And then Ananias, Paul goes before him, and Paul is given permission to speak, beginning in verse 10. And again, he gives his defense, and he points out correctly that there was no problem in the temple. That's why they said they arrested him, because he defiled the temple. But he says in verse 18 and 19, he says, "In the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with a tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me." You see, he went in the temple not to defile it. He went in there to purify himself with those 4 men who were taking a vow. And he said, if there's any other thing that I was doing in there, let those men come here and give testimony themselves. If I've done some other wrong, let them give you evidence. And if I have, where are they? And so again, he's asking for the proof against him, and of course there is none. And the council finds no fault in him. Verse 20 and 21, they find no fault in him. He says, or else let those who are themselves say if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council, unless it's for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged for you by this day. And so again, the council didn't find any fault with him. Why? Because they were too busy arguing and fighting when he brought up the resurrection. And so again, the barracks commander didn't find any fault with him. The Sanhedrin didn't find any fault with him. And now he's standing here in chapter 24, Ananias the high priest, and he's not been able to find any denies them to terrorists. They make some false charges, but they can't prove what they're saying. And Paul says there's no evidence. It's just trumped up. And so Felix holds off a decision. He just waits, and he's not going to do anything. And Felix and Drusilla come to hear Paul. And the Bible says in verse 24 and 25, after some days Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Now as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and judgment to come, Felix was afraid and answered, "Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you." You know, but the real purpose of Felix calling for Paul was that he hoped that he would give him a bribe so he could release him. Well, that didn't happen, and now the Jews come before Festus in chapter number 25, and Festus is coming to the Providence, and he comes up to Caesarea from the Providence, and they thought to bring Paul back to Jerusalem towards Festus. They want Festus to tell Felix to send him back. And he's brought before the judgment seat in verse 6. Charges cannot be proven. They make these charges, but there's no evidence, no witnesses. And so the charges cannot be proven. And when he sees that they're determined to send him to Jerusalem, and he knows that there are people waiting there for him to kill him, he appeals to Caesar. As a Roman citizen, he can appeal to Caesar. He now appeals to Caesar because he knows if he allows him to go back to Jerusalem, they're waiting for him to kill him. This is a way of his life being preserved by him appealing to Caesar. He not only will save his life, but he'll get to Rome. And that's where he wants to be. He wants to be in Rome to teach the gospel in Rome. And so Festus grants Paul's request. He's going to send him to Rome. He agrees and says he's appealed to Caesar he shall go. Now, before this, Agrippa comes in Acts 25, and Agrippa says that Festus has got a problem. He has to send him to Rome, but he doesn't have any charges to send him with, because he doesn't know what he's guilty of, except some things about the Jewish law, which is not a violation of Roman law. And so how's he going to send a prisoner to Rome to be charged when you don't know what the charges are? And so he's telling Agrippa about this. And Agrippa says, you know, I've heard about this man, I'd like to hear him. And so they determined Agrippa liked to hear Paul. And so Paul had done nothing worthy of death. According to verse 23 through 27, he's done nothing worthy of death. And Paul now speaks in the presence of Agrippa and gives his own defense. And he retold the story of his persecution and his conversion like he had done earlier. Now, he says in verse 19 through 23 of chapter 26 that he was obedient to the heavenly vision. That vision that he had on Acts 9, he was obedient to it, and he went into Damascus and he talked to Ananias, he heard the truth, and he obeyed it. And then he went into Arabia, and now he's been preaching the gospel since. And Festus thinks Paul's mad. He thinks all this learning made Paul go insane. And he tells Festus, I'm not insane. I'm not insane. I speak words of reason. He understands he's speaking the truth, and he knows Agrippa knows it too. He confronts Agrippa about the truth of the facts. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says to Agrippa. In Acts 26, verse 26, he just confronts Agrippa. For the king, before whom I now speak freely, knows these things, for I am convinced that none of these things escaped his attention, since none of these things were done in the corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. You see, Agrippa was well aware. He was in the Herod family. He was aware of Jesus and his teaching and Christians. He understood all of this. And he understood about Jesus and Christianity and about the opposition. He knew about all of that. And so he tells him, do you believe the prophets? He knows, Agrippa knows what the prophets said. And so he confronts him to admit that he knows. Agrippa is almost persuaded. He's almost persuaded to become a Christian. But Agrippa finds him innocent. And had he not appealed to Caesar, he would be let go because he's done nothing worthy of change or death. And so, according to Roman law, he has done nothing that he should be chained, in prison, or be put to death. But since he's appealed to Rome, he has to go to Rome. Now, that begins the end of our story, how Paul gets to Rome. The prisoners are delivered to the centurion, and the centurion takes a liking to Paul. And the winds are contrary, and they are placed on the Alexandrian ship. Earlier, Paul warns them that maybe they shouldn't go on this trip. And Paul's advice goes unheeded. He warned them that he believes that if they go on this trip, that it's going to end in disaster. Verse 10 says, "Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of cargo and ship, but also of life." And so Paul's advising them that they should not go any further. They're trying to get to Rome. They're trying to find favorable winds, but the time of favorable sailing is past, and instead they should just stay there and harbor there for the winter. But in verse 11, "Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening towards the southwest and northwest, and they would winter there." And so what they're going to do is, the commander of the ship tells them that they're going to try to get to the island of Crete, because there's a better place to winter there. Phoenix, that's off the island of Crete, and they can winter there until they can get a ship going into Rome after the winter is past. And so they head to Phoenix for the winter. Verse 12 and 13, Paul's opposition is noted, but it's rejected, and they take the helmsman's advice, and they begin to go ahead and leave, and they sail towards Phoenix in Crete. Well, 10th verse wind called Euclanda begins to circle, and it begins to batten the ship. And the skiff is secured and lightened because it's getting so bad. It's rough and it's difficult. The winds are contrary, and they're not able to steer. No sun or stars are seen for many days. That would make navigation impossible. They don't know exactly where they're at. They don't know exactly where they're going. And Paul encourages the men, told them there would be no loss of life, because God had appeared to him in a vision and said that he would grant all the ones that are with him, and that he would appear before Caesar in Rome. And so he encourages them and tells them he believes it will be just like God told him, that they'll get there safely. But the ship must run aground. He said their lives would be spared, but the ship is going to be destroyed. And so they took soundings and dropped off the anchors in chapter 27, verse 27 through 29, and they see that the depth is getting less. The water is getting more shallow, and they know they're coming towards shore. And Paul warns them that if they want to be spared, as God promised, they have to stay in the ship. Now this is interesting in verse number 30. "Now the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship when they let down the skiff in the sea on pretense of putting out anchors from the brow. Paul said to the centurion, the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the rope on the skiff and let it fall away." So Paul tells them if they want to be spared, and they want the crew to be spared, that they're going to have to stay in the ship. And so the centurion cuts away the skiff and lets the lifeboats lets them go. Now, for 2 weeks, they're battered around the sea. No food, no sun, no stars, and for 2 weeks, and most of them have given up hope that they'd ever be saved. The wheat and cargo are thrown in the sea. Why? To lighten the ship. Centurion wants to keep the prisoners alive. They know they're going to have to run aground, and some of the crew wants to kill the prisoners lest any of them escape. But the centurion keeps him from doing that because of his wanting to protect Paul. And so he protects that from not happening. Now, what happens is they run aground and they go to an island called Malta. And all 276 people that were on board made it to the island. Nobody was lost. Remember? That's what Paul said. He said that God granted that all that sailed with him would also be spared. And so the natives made a fire because it was cold, and made them warm and made them welcome. Now, while Paul's picking up sticks to put in the fire, and he picks up a bundle, viper or snake, fastens on his arm and bites him. And when he shakes it off and throws it into the fire. Well, the natives, seeing that he was bitten, they surmised that he was a murderer and he escaped the shipwreck, but the justice won't demand that he lives, and so now this is the way that he's going to die. And so they're watching him, waiting for him to swell up or fall over, and neither happens. And when neither happens, then they determine that he's a god. He's not a murderer, now he's a god. And the leading citizen of that country entertained them and met their need for the next 3 days. And finds out that his father-in-law is sick with dysentery. Paul heals him. He heals the father-in-law and all the sick. All the sick. And then when he healed him, they brought him all the sick, and Paul healed them all. And when they left, they supplied every need that they had. If they needed food, if they needed clothing, whatever they needed, it was supplied by the island when they called an Alexandrian ship to go into Rome. And so they arrive in Puteoli and stay with brethren, according to verse 11 through 14. And they're met by brethren at a paying forum in verse 15. And they arrive in Rome, and Paul's allowed to dwell in a house with a guard by himself and to have liberty and to have people come and see him. And Paul calls the Jewish leaders together to ask them if they've heard anything about Paul. And they'd already been warned about him. And they had heard nothing about him. And so then he calls them together to speak to them. And they wanted to hear about the sect. Yeah, they'd heard about Jesus. They'd heard about the Nazarene sect. They'd heard about Christians, and they weren't sure about that, so they wanted to hear Paul about that. And so Paul lodged and taught the gospel for 2 years. For 2 years. When he taught those Jews, some believed and others rejected, but then they left him there for 2 years in a rented house, and he taught the gospel to any that came to him. Any that would come and visit and see him, he would teach the gospel. And he taught the gospel for 2 whole years in Rome. And prophecy was fulfilled in them. He told them that these people, these Jews, they were stiff-necked. They were uncircumcised. Listen to what he says in verse 25. So when they did not agree among themselves, they departed after Paul said one word. The Holy Spirit spoke rightly through Isaiah the prophet to our fathers, saying, Go to this people and say, Hearing you will hear, and shall not understand, seeing you will see, and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull, the ears are hard of hearing, their eyes are closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts, and turn so that I should heal them. Therefore let it be known to you that the salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will hear it. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had great dispute among themselves. He says that you're just hard-hearted. You just won't listen. You just stop your ears. You won't accept the truth. And it's just like the prophet Isaiah wrote about you so long ago in Isaiah chapter 6, 9, and 10. And so now he's going to leave the Jews and he's going to teach the Gentiles because he knows they will listen. Now, I want you to think about something if we bring this lesson to a close. Paul was told that he was going to Rome. That was way back in Acts chapter 21 when he was told that he was going to become a prisoner in Jerusalem. God made no direct intervention. At no time from Acts 21 to the end of the chapter did God make any direct intervention. He didn't send an angel down to do some supernatural thing. He didn't do any of that. And yet, the choices of men and Paul. Paul made the choices in his life. He determined what to say. He determined when he appeared before Felix, Festus, Agrippa, Ananias, the Sanhedrin. He made those decisions. When he found out they were plotting his life, he made the decision in order to protect himself. And he made the appeal to Rome when it was best suited in order to protect himself. And as a prisoner in Rome, he went to Rome. He was in prison, but the gospel was still preached in Rome. Yes, he was chained. He was in prison, but the gospel was not chained. The gospel went forth, and he preached for 2 whole years and converted many people who came to see him while he was in Rome. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the life of the Apostle Paul, especially his trip to Rome, we see the hand of God with him all along the way. God didn't miraculously intervene. He didn't cause a miracle to happen. He allowed the judgments and the choices of men to be made, even those who didn't believe in him, even by the people on the ship, even by the centurion, even by the mob that was contrary to what he wanted. But he let those decisions be made, and then he worked his plan by those decisions. Now, even though they were trying to kill Paul, even though they were seeking to destroy him, silence him, they made their choices, and Paul, through God's providence, was able to combat them, and was able to offset it, and was able to do what he wanted to do, and that is to get to Rome in order to teach the gospel to the lost and dying in Rome. We're told in other passages, he even preached the gospel to the household of Caesar. Now think about that. This is how providence works. God doesn't need to make a miracle. He doesn't have to do some divine intervention. He doesn't have to create some miraculous help. All we have to do is trust him, believe in him, make the choices, and by the choices we make, God's will be done in our lives. That's how it works. That's how it worked with Joseph. That's how it worked with Esther. And that's how it worked with the Apostle Paul. And that's how it works today.